All right, let's discuss Chapter 6 of Gulliver's Travels, Part 2, Brobdingnag, where he is in the country of great giants, where the early bits of it, we get him using the king's hair for a comb brush, and the queen's hair to basically weave together like kind of cane furniture. Like instead of weaving cane together, he weaves the queen's hair together, but he would never sit on it, you know, with an inappropriate part of his body touching the queen's hair. So he just gives it to her as a gift. And I think, oh, and also uses some of the queen's hair to make a little purse, which he gives to Glumdalclitch, his nurse, who couldn't put coins in it because they'd be too rough and they'd bite through it. But she put some of other toys in it that her little, as a little girl. But the main focus of this chapter is the king, who is great, definitely kind of a philosopher king, definitely kind of the kind of a thing, a symbol of kind of reason, as much as the Lilliputian king was definitely the kind of like the you know, the dark side of a king, of like, you know, you don't do what he desires, his id, then he will kill you, he will starve you, he'll blind you and starve you to death as mercy. And the louder you proclaim his mercy, the more you know he's not being merciful. Yeah, no, he sits, and in 5 sessions he goes through and describes the governance of England, the peers and the commoners, you know, getting together. Describes the bishops, describes the education of the nobility, you know, to rise them up to the great heights. You know, it's all done in the most glowing terms, which you know, I'm assuming any contemporary of Swift could only take as sarcasm, of like, you know, how the courts were great at, you know, sages who would weigh out everything impartially, you know, that, you know, the perfection of laws. He talked about the pastimes, he talked about the treasury and management of finances, and all this. And the king was very attentive, takes notes all the way through, has follow-up questions, and kind of grills him on stuff, basically poking holes in the whole thing. You know, and basically at the end of it saying, like, you know, his final conclusion, because I mean, he goes through a lot of stuff, like, you have a standing army, yet you're supposedly a free country. You're pursuing all these wars. It's obviously there's rife corruption throughout the entire thing. You know, and says, my little friend Gllvr, which is what they call Gulliver here, you have made a most admirable panegyric upon your country. You have clearly proved that ignorance, idleness, and vice are the proper ingredients for qualifying a legislature, that laws are best explained, interpreted, applied by those whose interests and abilities lie in perverting, confounding, and eluding them. This is an excursion. This chapter is just like, it just rips into the present day, you know, 3 kingdoms of Great Britain, Ireland, Scotland, and England. Rips into them. You know, exposing everything. At the beginning, he talks about, oh, if I could have only had the eloquence of Demosthenes and Cicero, but as the notes mention, it's much more Juvenal, the satiric ripping of Juvenal that is actually going on with Swift's satire. And he ends up, I cannot conclude, the king concludes, I cannot but conclude the bulk of your natives to be the most pernicious race of little odious vermin that nature ever suffered to crawl upon the surface of the earth. This is someone of reason looking down with a true looking down global view upon this world and judging it. Oh, and the judgment is not good. You know, vermin, odious vermin, that nature ever suffered to crawl upon the surface of this earth. So good in his just ripping apart of this thing. And it's just like, you can see why this work was published anonymously, that I don't believe in his lifetime Swift actually took any official credit for any of these works. Yeah, wow. Yeah, I'm not going to go into the super details of it because I would just be reading the big hunky notes here. You know, the things that, you know, it's you know, there's past history, because he's talking about like the past history of, like, you know, there's been hypocrisy, corruption, you know, overthrows, you know, rebellion, lots of stuff. And then, I mean, obviously, Swift is writing from the losers on this thing. Their guy, George I, is now in control of the country. You know, and there's a thing here of, like, you know, hey, Swift was a bishop, and he was very much for kind of the church, but he was also one of the church's harshest critics. Yeah, and about the thing about the standing army, and just the prosecution of wars. Also, just an interesting thing in here of, like, how, you know, you shouldn't, you know, there is a thing here about, yeah, he knew no reason. Swift's thoughts of religions. You may force men by interest or punishment to say or swear they believe, to act as if they believe. You can go no further. Every man, as a member of the Commonwealth, ought to be content with the possession of his own opinion in private, without perplexing his neighbor or disturbing the public. Which is an interesting thing of just, like, you know, how much control should the state expect to wield over individuals in a state, and what they should be satisfied with, because there's definitely the ideas of, like, you know, even in your own home, you can't give voice to opinions that are that are counter to the thing, even though you're not trying to publish them. There's still that kind of era thing of paranoia, that you have to be careful what you're saying at all times. You never know who is going to be listening in this society. So yeah, Swift. I am definitely, you know, it's not a novel. It's a travelogue. It's a satirical travelogue. It's really pulling apart a lot of ideas. It's doing a savage critique of culture at this time, but, you know, there's a lot of this stuff that you could say that applies now. You can see why Swift echoes down through the ages. All right, I will leave it there. More videos later.